I think we're ready to get started. Brandon?
Yes, thank you. And yes, we do have everybody admitted and hooked up. So
Okay, good.
I will go ahead and get started with our announcement about COVID provisions just for the Kansas Meetings Act. And maybe just a word first that the city is starting to slowly transition back to some in-person meetings with in-person board attendance. I did send a message to the board members earlier today, just a note about that, that we hope to be able to do that with this board in the near future. Right now we are sort of limited in our technical capability to accommodate a board of 7. And all of our advisory boards, I think, have 7 or more members. So while the city commission has started returning to in-person meetings, we're still kind of working through the logistics of how to actually accommodate that in this room for those boards that have 7 or more members. So I appreciate your patience as we continue working through those technical challenges. So related to this evening's meeting, just a few reminders that board members and other participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various members of city staff are present in the room and via Zoom. We must also state our names and titles each time we speak. All motions need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. The agenda for the meeting provided instructions for how to submit public comment and how it will be handled. And we did receive some written public comment, which is attached as correspondence to this agenda. Finally, the chair will call for in-person public comment for those who are in attendance in person. And I will say at this point, we do not have anybody attending in person, but I will advise if that status changes. And then lastly, please, those of us on Zoom, please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. Thank you.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Brandon. We're ready to go ahead and get started with the agenda. Item A, approve minutes. This would be the minutes from June 10th, 2021.
Jane Gibson, board member. I move we approve the minutes from June 10th, 2021.
Second. Sanjay, Mishra, board member. Second.
There's a motion by this Chair Salvini. There's a motion by board member Gibson to approve. There's a second by board member Mishra that's seconding the motion. Any discussion? If not, those of you who approve say yay. Those of you opposed, nay. Gibson?
Yay.
Graybill?
Board member Graybill, yay.
Littleton?
Yay.
Mishra?
Sanjay, Mishra, board member, yes.
Robinson?
Yay.
Taylor?
Board member Marie Taylor, yay.
Chair Salvini, yay. We've got 7 affirmed votes for the minutes. Thank you all. We'll move on to public comments. Stephanie, would you like to take agenda item B?
Sure, this board member is Stephanie Littleton.
Thank you.
So we have one communication that has been submitted, and that was by citizen Stephen Watts, and so that is attached to the agenda. And I think, Brandon, we don't have anybody in to speak, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So then I
Stephanie,
think
what about Alex? Alex is here.
Sure. Oh. Hello, Alex. I didn't even see him up there. Alex, do you have anything you wish to speak of?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, we'll go ahead and move to agenda item C. We'll go to number 1. Received the City of Lawrence Police Department report to the Kansas Attorney General on racial and other bias-based policing. Brandon?
Yes, this is
City Manager Brandon McGuire. Lieutenant Dave Ernst is actually going to walk board members through the report real quick, so I'll turn the floor over to him.
Hello, everyone. Lieutenant David Ernst. For some of you, this is mildly old hat in the sense I think this is our 3rd year in presenting this report. Just to kind of go over the process of this report is, so we have a requirement to submit the report to you prior to providing it to the Attorney General's office. So what has been done is essentially creating a Word document that mirrors the output from the AG's office after we put in the data. So this is a draft report, but essentially you go to their website, you select the reporting year, and then put in the data, and it will generate a report very similar to this. So just to walk you through, the reporting year, I believe, is self-explanatory. As you note, we've had 3 complaints in the past reporting year. And then we have the questions that are required of us to answer, which is now, we've consistently answered the same, I think, for the past couple of years. The only thing that has changed, well, last year we were collecting citation data, and this year as well. And so I guess I'll just take any questions you might have.
Any questions? This is Chair Salvini. Any questions? Comments? Board Member Mishra?
Thank you, Tonia. This is Board Member Sanjay. So one of the things I looked at this table is the date the complaint was received and the lag when the complaint was closed. Is that regular? And the second question, Officer Ernst, let me piggyback on it, is what's the source of this complaint? Because someplace outside of this, I have seen some are public generated, some are internal.
Sure. So one about the length of time, it would tell.
I don't know exactly for these because I'm not in the Office of Professional Accountability anymore. Something that is typical is waiting the outcome of court proceedings. That's a common reason that puts what would appear to be a lengthy delay on things. And so I can't say if is this typical or normal. It's really just dependent upon the circumstances. But at least in my experience of being down there, once the ability to investigate, where the court proceedings is over, any sort of hindrances might be there, I don't want to say it doesn't take too long, but it generally is worked on fairly expeditiously. As far as you mentioned the complaints about them being internal or external, I believe you had received some information via email earlier on one of the complaints, but I can just briefly go through. Complaint 20-5 was an internally generated complaint. 20-6 was externally generated, and the PC 21-017, I don't know the source of that. I suspect it's externally generated based on its waiting for the court proceedings, but I don't know. And also just to add the identifier difference there, if you notice we have the 20-5 and 20-6, and then the identifier changes, and that is due to our new IA Pro, our complaint tracking software.
Thank you.
This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, thank you for presenting this report to the board. I'm wondering whether the format is just to meet the minimum requirements that are required from the Attorney General's office. Has there been any discussion about making it more comprehensive? For instance, more description on what sustained means, or to include that information in the report, or is that not required by the Attorney General's office?
I'd have to go, it's filled out once a year, and actually I won't be filling out this year. I want to say essentially it's not required. You just go through and fill in this basic information, then it produces this report. And so I don't want to be misleading, but I don't recall if there's much room to put other than the disposition. Does that answer your question?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I might jump in. The report is submitted through the Attorney General's system, like through a portal,
yes.
Web portal. And I believe these are the data fields that we enter. And so this is our attempt to replicate the data that is submitted.
If you were to search online now, if you go to the Kansas Attorney General's office, and well, I don't have it memorized, you could find previous reports that we've submitted. And I say it's almost identical. There's a couple just odd. We've put our own title at the top, but it essentially looks like what you folks have in front of you. There's actually a sort of a disclaimer in a signature field page. That would be page number 2, which is, it's not there because we haven't actually submitted this report yet.
This is Chair Salvini. Board Member Taylor, does that satisfy?
Board Member Murray Taylor, yes, that answers my question. And I have another comment, but it's more general comment, and that we had talked previously when we were briefed about the Attorney General from the Attorney General's office about the possibility of having a comprehensive plan. That I'm wondering what kind of reporting comes out of that once a city decides to have a more comprehensive plan for racial and other bias-based policing.
I have the only one slight answer I could provide you to that is
I can give you the statute number pertaining to comprehensive plans. As admittedly, I was expecting to be asked this because I almost I'm learning from experience, and I know ultimately we had the training on it. So I have the statute. It's the statute number. It's KSA 22-4611A. And I don't recall seeing anything about different reporting requirements in there, but you can view, I was more looking about kind of what triggers the comprehensive plan, and it essentially mentions the governing body can develop a comprehensive plan. And so I don't think it mentions reporting requirements, but at least I've provided you the statute about the comprehensive plan.
Marie Taylor, board member, as a follow-up question, has there been any movement on the possibility of doing that, having a comprehensive plan?
Kind of a difficult, admittedly, going into the meeting or preparing for the meeting is, I was trying to refresh my memory. I do recall the training, but I'm just going off of the statute. It makes mention of the governing body of a city or sheriff of a county may develop a comprehensive plan in conjunction with the community advisory board. And then it goes on to list things that a comprehensive plan would obtain. So admittedly, I can't sit here and read this and say exactly how one gets started or formed. And so that might be up for discussion at another time, but it doesn't say that the police department shall present it to the community police review board, or it doesn't even say that vice versa. So I don't know necessarily the impetus in getting one started.
Yeah. This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I might just offer that if that's something the board wishes to schedule for a discussion at a future meeting, we could put together, and I'm volunteering some of our staff to help with this, but we could put together kind of some guidance on how that process might look. I think ultimately that's a policy decision for the city commission to make, but we could provide some information about what that comprehensive plan would look like and how we would go about initiating that. But I would look to a majority of the board to provide some direction on that.
Board Member Murray Taylor, thank you.
This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Mishra.
This is Sanjay Mishra, board member. So I'm glad item number 6, you have said yes to it. Is there any data that you can share?
the answering of number 6, I believe, has have to do with the
actually the disproportionate minority contact study, and so there's not any information to share yet on that. But it's more just acknowledging that, yes, we are collecting data. If I can, yes.
So is this ongoing, or is this just a study that was being conducted?
It is ongoing.
So okay. Basically, so we know who's being stopped and what their race, gender, racial profile is.
Yes. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
So basically, if this is ongoing, at this point, we know how many people we are stopping and what's their racial profile.
Yes. There's an ongoing data collection. So at this point in time, or the last, yes.
And how long has this been?
Now I'm going to have to defer to Major McKinley on that. I forget when the study started.
Sure. This is Major Trent McKinley. I don't know. Can you all hear me okay? I'm a distance away from the Zoom microphone.
Good. Thank you. Good.
Yes. Originally, this was going to be about a 12-month study with a group out of Northeastern University that the county contracted with. That was for all law enforcement agencies within Douglas County, with the exception of the Kansas Highway Patrol. They embarked on that study as COVID pretty much shut us down. So as soon as that study got going with live data in January of 2020, we went into COVID. Our stops plummeted, and they had a certain level of data that was required to make their findings statistically accurate, and I don't know what threshold that was, but basically when we slowed way down, they pushed out the timeline that it might take for them to complete their study. They are close to having enough data at this point in time. We communicated with them today just to provide our June data to them, but within the next couple of months, and I mean 2 or 3 months, they should have enough data. They'll begin to process it and analyze it, and then that group is going to come back and report out to, it's my understanding, the CJCC and potentially also to the City Commission to talk about the findings.
So may I ask a follow-up, please?
Absolutely.
So if this question were to be answered next year, would the answer be yes or no?
So that's a question for whether or not the agencies are going to continue collecting data. At this point in time, we have not had a robust discussion. Obviously, we're in a position where we have an interim police chief. We'd like to see what him or her thinks when they arrive here in Lawrence and undertake the job as to whether or not that data collection is going to occur. But I can tell you through the remainder of this calendar year in connection with that study, we will continue to collect data. And I cannot speak for any of the other agencies that are participating in the study.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, is there a motion?
So motion will be just to receive it, that we received it. I will move.
And Board Member Littleton?
I second that motion to receive it as well.
Okay, there's a motion made by Board Member Mishra to accept the report. There's a second by Stephanie Littleton. Board Member Stephanie Littleton to receive the report. Any discussion? Board Member Marie Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor. I would like for us to think about potentially for a future item to take up that offer to have city staff work with us to figure out at least what kind of roadmap we would need to get to have a comprehensive plan for the city of Lawrence. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's an action item. It's not posted that way, but perhaps for a future agenda item, they could assist us with bringing that to a meeting, some sort of outline of the steps and what entails and funding and costs related to that effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Board Member Taylor. Any other discussion? Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Stephanie Littleton. Yeah, to Marie's point, yeah, I think maybe a year or so ago we've kind of come full circle on that. I'm trying to think of the accreditation lieutenant that the PD is pursuing, because I think we had at one point talked about whether that was inclusive within that accreditation. I'm not sure if we ever verified that or not, but we have talked about that. But it would be nice to at least entertain that and see in the big picture, what does that mean, right? So yeah, I agree with that. So thanks, Marie, for bringing that up.
This is Chair Salvini. I'm wondering also, I remember maybe within the last year and a half, we did have a presentation from the Attorney General's office, is that correct? Where this was also briefly discussed as well. So just a recall on that. Brandon, do you recall when that was or what we could refer to go back and revisit the content that was presented?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Tonia, are you referring to the Deputy Attorney General Kate Carter's presentation?
Yes.
That was actually, was it December?
I feel like it was in the fall.
Within the last.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and it was in response to the presentation of last year's report where there's an inquiry about the, already I'm blanking again, the plan here.
Yes,
the comprehensive, yes. Right? Okay.
Yes.
Very good then. Thank you, and thank you, Marie.
And again, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I do want to make sure that I have a clear understanding of the board's expectations. So, if there is an expectation that city staff come back at a date with a presentation on a comprehensive plan, I would appreciate clarifying that through a vote of the board. Just, I've seen head nods, I've seen some head nods, some body language, but I think it would help us understand what the board's work, goals for your work plan are to have that in a motion.
Okay, this is Chair Salvini. Do you have any response, group? Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor. So for a motion, I would say that the board requests that staff provide additional information and an outline of steps for creating a comprehensive plan for the city, including some estimates of cost and other expenses that would entail to have such a plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As a point of discussion, I would like to say we are in a discussion point within an existing standing motion. So once we process through this, we'll revisit that for sure. Board Member Graybill.
You just covered my.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Bill. Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, and hopefully someone wrote what I just said down. So
I scribbled. Okay, I think we can certainly revisit that once we're out. So, any other discussion? Okay, if not, let's go for a vote. Yay to approve, and nay to oppose. Board Member Gibson.
Tonia, just to be clear, Gibson board member, we're voting on receiving the report.
On receiving the report, excuse me.
Not on Marie's motion.
That's right.
Yay.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Board Member Graybill?
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Board Member Littleton?
Board Member Littleton, yay.
Board Member Mishra?
Board Member Mishra, yay.
Board Member Robinson?
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor, yay.
And Chair Salvini, yay. The yays have it, and that's passing with a vote of 7-0. Okay, let's real quickly revisit the discussion items during that motion process. And I'm going to attempt to just read from my notes here. It's an interest by Board Member Taylor to look at a future agenda item to consider a type of a roadmap to achieving for the future what a comprehensive process might look like in terms of putting the plan to get a comprehensive plan together for the city of Lawrence on racial bias and non-bias based policing, and that should include future funding and what the feasibility is in terms of going forward with that. So that's a lot of word mixing. So I'm sure someone can take what I just said and put it into the form of a motion. Board Member Taylor, would you like to revisit that?
Stephanie has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have the full screen. Okay, thank you. Board Member Littleton.
This Board Member Littleton. Okay, so this is what Marie said. So basically, and you did well, you did fine. Her motion is that the board requests the staff provide additional information on steps for a roadmap for a comprehensive plan with costs and expenses to have one. There you go.
Okay, is there a motion then that one would like to make? Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, Board Member. We already have the motion. I'll second it.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Stephanie. I didn't know that was a motion. So we've got a motion by Littleton and a second by Gibson.
No, the motion was by Marie.
Oh, excuse me. Motion by Marie, repeated sloppily by Salvini and very more concisely by Littleton, and seconded by Gibson, and open for discussion. I see Board Member Robinson.
Do we want to, Board Member Robinson, do we want to discuss a timeline for this? Like maybe within the next 2 months, 3 months? What are you all thinking about this? Because we're kind of in the middle of the, our other work as well. So yeah, I just wanted to discuss timeline.
Okay, any discussion on timeline? Let's see, looking at a calendar.
Board Member Jane Gibson, Tonia?
Yes.
I understand the importance of a timeline and having some expectation of when this might happen. I'm a little concerned that we already have a pretty full plate. Mm-hmm. So I'm reluctant to, I think in August, we're going to know more about what the expectations from the City Commission are with regard to this working group and any role that we might play in that. I'm hoping that Brandon's going to clarify that for us. And then we still have an ordinance to work on. So, and to try to get through the City Commission once we get some feedback, I hope from the police department, perhaps. It just feels like the plate's full, and I'm glad to see this happen. I think this is an important initiative. I'm just not clear when we would be able to fit this in, that's all.
This is Chair Salvini. I think if we at least made an effort to make sure it appeared on an agenda for the future to discuss whether we want to move forward on it or not, or how we want to approach it, and not to lose it, might be something. Brandon, I'm going to go to you a little bit. You wanted some type of motion for the purpose of putting it on the record.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. For putting it on the record, yes, but also more importantly to Board Member Gibson's point, there is a lot on the board's plate right now. There is a lot on city staff's plate right now, and I just want to make sure that if that's a priority for the board, that we work on that and you work on that, that we understand that very clearly, because that means that we're going to probably have to put some other things on hold in order to make that happen on a short timeline, or we'll have to set an expectation for a longer timeline. And I would also just point out, in addition to some of the work items that the board has mentioned, there are potentially new board member appointments coming up. I believe after the August meeting, if I have the timeline right. And so then city staff will have to work on orientation of new board members and, potentially. And then we are also working diligently on our response to the Citygate report that we owe to the City Commission August 3rd. And that's pretty much the people on this meeting working on that to a large degree.
Understood, and thank you for the response. I'm going to say that yes, our plate is full, but again, I don't want to lose this thought because this is not the first time this has come up, and it certainly seems important. I think perhaps to all of us. We'll see when we vote, but perhaps we can, in terms of a timeline, Jenny, and recognizing what you were talking about, we could look at after a few months, meaning maybe in the spring of 22, start visiting it and thinking about what's the feasibility, how long realistically might it take to start the process, because it is going to take a while. And we want to do it well, we want to do it right and collaboratively, and certainly our plates are full. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. What Marie has asked for really is the kind of step-by-step, how do we do this? Maybe we can get that, and then we can make a decision about when we want to begin working on it. I mean, to ask for the step-by-step is not the same
whole thing, right?
Project as trying to develop a comprehensive plan around racial and bias-based policing. So maybe we could we can ask Brandon what is feasible to get us a step-by-step that Marie's asking for. Does that make sense? That seems sensible?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I just in talking with Lieutenant
and Major McKinley, I think we can have that back to you in about 3 months, if that is satisfactory.
Yeah. It sounds reasonable to me. Other board members? Board Member Littleton.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton. I think October, November-ish. I mean, that's what you're referring to is reasonable.
Okay. Okay, we've had discussion. We still have a motion on the floor. And the motion has been made by Taylor, seconded by Gibson, and it's to check out the feasibility of looking at and exploring the process of implementing a comprehensive plan. Board Member Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. Then I'd like, if with Marie's permission, I'd like to offer a friendly amendment that we ask for outline this step-by-step and additional information by end of October. Brandon said 3 months, and that's 4. So how's that sound?
Okay. Member Marie Taylor, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. We're now looking at a friendly amendment to the original motion by Board Member Taylor, which she agreed to, and that is to put a time frame to look at the process by the end of October. Okay, are we ready to take a vote? Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor, yay. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Gibson.
Yes.
Board Member Graybill.
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Board Member Littleton.
Yes.
Board Member Mishra.
Yes.
Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, yes.
And Chair Salvini, yes. The vote has it 7-0. Okay, thank you all. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is to receive the Community Police Review Board, annual report 2021. and Brandon. This is a draft. And Brandon, would you like to walk us through it?
Sure. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. This is a draft that I did put together on the board, and I took the liberty of doing that. But I think that's been the tradition for staff to kind of take the first attempt at that in the past. So really, it's a pretty basic report. And I'm going to go ahead, if you don't mind, and share my screen just so everybody on the call is seeing the same thing that I'm seeing. And so this is the report that has the publication date, July 2021, but really the board had multiple meetings last July 2022, so the timeline does run a little bit from July to August timeframe there at the beginning. Obviously, the train doesn't really slow down. You just kind of jump on and hope to get a ride. And so all this does is highlight the fact that the board has met 14 times over the last year. And I try to draw attention to the fact that all meetings were conducted virtually, which, just from my observation, I think is an important thing to note. When you don't have that face-to-face interaction with each other, and people have different kind of latency, and in some cases we're in different time zones even participating in the meetings. It's quite a feat to pull off this volume of work as a board, where some of you and some of us, myself included, still haven't actually met face to face. So I think that that's just important to note, and I think it's an acknowledgement of the good work that you all have done. So just kind of a list of major activities. And I tried to sort of group these without formally organizing the report as such, but the re-election of Tonia and Stephanie into their leadership positions of the board. We had new board members come on a year ago now, almost, how time flies. And then last summer, and this was I think July time frame, late July, early August, the board submitted a recommendation to the City Commission to expand membership from 7 to 9 members, and that resulted in feedback about a more comprehensive look at the authorizing ordinance. The board formed a subcommittee it was an ad hoc committee to draft the ordinance and work on ordinance drafting and research, and another standing committee on community engagement. There have been many meetings of each of those committees, or several meetings, over the last year. There was a discussion on implicit and bias in the context of fulfilling the board's duties, and I kind of regret not linking to all of the different agendas that all these discussions happened on, because I recall that was there was a lot of really good content around that discussion that was provided by board members, and very thought-provoking content. The board received a presentation on outside complaints and personnel investigations from 2017 to 2019. Let's see, individual board members helped city staff with the selection of the Comprehensive Police Department Study Consultant, and we appreciate you all engaging in that work. Received a presentation on GARE, Race Equity Toolkit, and then a number of other accomplishments and activities that the board conducted over the last year. I won't go into all of these, but I will kind of just highlight a couple that have been mentioned this evening, which is the presentation from Deputy Attorney General Kate Carter on bias-based policing, the discussion with District Attorney Susan Valdez, and I think she was still incoming at the time, but that was a very good discussion on the role of her office in the criminal justice system. I believe the same meeting, the presentation by then Interim Chief of Police Anthony Brixius on the police department's complaint process and kind of flow charting that whole process. And that resulted in some good recommendations for website and communications updates that we were able to incorporate into the website. And then I think obviously the big highlights are the big Lawrence Listens community engagement project, which I thought was very successful in terms of generating a lot of public feedback, more so than we see on most of our community engagement forums on Lawrence Listens. And then obviously the draft ordinance. And so really this is presented to the board for comments. If there are any revisions that you would like to see incorporated, or any additions, or even striking of bullet points, please let me know. The board does owe this report, or some form of this report, to the City Commission at the August 3rd meeting in order to meet the deadline established in your authorizing ordinance. And so I will take whatever feedback I get this evening, incorporate that into the final report, and I'll submit that on behalf of the board for the August 3rd City Commission agenda.
This is Chair Salvini. Brandon, quick question. So the interviews that some of us have had, if not all of us, with the team that was selected to search for the new chief of police, would that be included in this report too, in terms of our involvement in that?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. That was the reference to the moving train analogy. That it's kind of hard to just draw a arbitrary deadline.
Okay.
And since that work is kind of ongoing, I decided to just cut off, and we'll put it in next year's report.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Board Member Taylor, and then Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So for one of the bullets on the improvements to the website and public communications, it calls out the community engagement subcommittee, but I think that really was from all of the board. We had lots of discussions of the whole board who offered improvements that, and I'd love her to say a little bit more that those were actually implemented. Lots of good changes happened from that effort. So to have that bullet point also discuss that it was the entire board who was involved in that effort, and that those changes actually were effectuated.
Very good point.
Thank you, Board Member Taylor. This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra, thank you, Brandon, for putting this together, and this very well reflects what we did. What I was hoping there would be some forward-looking statements that for the next year, these are issues that the board should consider. Is that fair expectation? And that's where I think our chair and vice chair could get a chance to frame their thoughts.
This is Chair Salvini. Board Member Littleton, Vice Chair Littleton. Any comments or by any of the board members?
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. And certainly, Tonia and I can come together and put some thought into that, because off the top of my head, I do have a couple of thoughts. And I think that's probably a good idea, Sanjay, to put some of that in there. Besides, here's what we've done, but here's where we're going. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm glad to draft something up, but I'd really like for all the board members to have input in on that as well, certainly. is it good with the board for Stephanie and I to work collaboratively to come up with some bullet points of going forward? And then Brandon, can you all share it with the board for feedback?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, we can
accommodate that. I think the way it'll work is if you and Stephanie make an attempt at drafting, I'll share it with the board. They can share feedback with me. I'll work that into a final draft, and we'll make sure it gets submitted for the agenda.
Or into the report?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do we need a motion for that?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I would appreciate a motion. I do feel like it's taking quite a bit of liberty to draft on behalf of the board, so I want to have you
board in submitting it.
This is Chair Salvini. Appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you.
And Tonia, I do see Alex's hand up for if you want to entertain any public comment.
Absolutely. Thank you. The Chair Salvini calls on citizen Alex Kerr.
Hello. So I have a couple of things I'd like to speak of. I have personally reviewed the Community Place Review Board 2020-2021 and annual report and spoke with multiple people. The people that I have spoken with do support this. Good job, Brandon, for writing this. Another thing is the Lawrence community does want to remind this board, the Lawrence community will stand by this board and advise this board for the 2021-2022 CPRB Community Place Review Board meetings. Personally, reading through this, I have realized that this is probably the longest time I've ever been doing this with the board and working with the board. And I will make sure personally to make sure the community gets the information that the community needs about this board. Also, I do understand that there is a lot on the plate for the city staff and this board. But the good thing is I love pressure. So that's a check mark. That's all I have for this agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for your input, Alex. Appreciated. Okay, are we ready for a motion? Board Member Gibson?
Just by default, Board Member Jane Gibson. I move that we authorize Stephanie and Tonia to draft some revisions as suggested by Marie. And what was the other revision? About forward-looking statements by Sanjay, and that you'll bring it back to the board and we'll review it and accept it at that time, or consider accepting it at that time. And also, not a part of the motion, but also thanks to Brandon and to Stephanie and Tonia for being willing to do this.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Gibson. Is there a second? Board Member Mishra? Okay. And so once it, go ahead.
Madam Chair, sorry, Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I just want to
clarify. Jane did say that we'll bring the revisions back to the board for, I believe, acceptance. So Jane, did you mean that we'll bring it back like on the August agenda of this board meeting?
I did.
Okay, so just to clarify, the ordinance requires submission of this report at the first City Commission meeting following July 31st. And so we're bound by the ordinance to get the report to the City Commission at that first meeting in August.
Is there a penalty if we miss our deadline? Because this is a report by the board and it seems appropriate that the board should read the report.
I would say that's between the board and the City Commission. And I have a feeling they would like to see a more thorough report. that has the full support of the board, and just wait a week or two to see that. So that's just my input.
I do know that
Tony, I hate to put you on the spot, but Tony, if you do have a thought about that process, and if you would like to weigh in, please feel free to do so.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. I agree with Brandon. I believe that the commission would be pleased to have a more comprehensive report that has the full board's approval. I think one way that we could facilitate this is perhaps at the next city commission meeting, Brandon could make a report during the city manager's report and advise of the desire to have an extension, and give the commission an opportunity to let us know that, whether that's okay with them. If it isn't, then we could go to the effort of calling a special meeting of this board to meet the August 3rd deadline.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Gibson, then I will amend my motion to include that Brandon will ask the City Commission for an extension so that we can do this.
Okay, so this is for discussion. Please know that the motion is twofold, correct, Jane? In that the revisions that Marie Taylor recommended are folded into this, as well as the forward, going forward, I will say, section that Stephanie and I will work on. And then you're asking to also add that Brandon asked for an extension at the City Commission meeting to present the report.
I think you said it well.
Okay, thank you. So that's the motion, and the second was from Board Member Mishra. Right. Okay. Other discussion. I just want to make sure everybody knows what we're voting on. Okay. We're ready to vote. If there's no other discussion, we'll all those that are in favor vote yay. All those opposed, nay. We'll start with Board Member Gibson.
Yay.
Board Member Graybill.
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Littleton, yes.
Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Mishra, yes.
Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, yay.
And Chair Salvini, yay. This passes 7-0. Thank you all. Okay. I think we are ready to move ahead to item number 3, and that's review Community Police Review Board draft ordinance. And that would be looking at the hyperlink with the feedback. Is that what this is? Oh, I'm sorry.
Jane Gibson, board member.
Yeah.
The title there doesn't describe
match the thing, right?
We would be doing and I may have misunderstood, so you all can correct me. But
we're doing the
what we were going to do was
staff review,
suggested changes, not on this one. That we were going to bring back suggested changes to the ordinance based on our reading of the community feedback in that survey. Is that correct? Or do I have this wrong? I mean, we're not going to review the draft ordinance again. Well, I don't know what that would be.
Well, it isn't the draft ordinance. My understanding was we're going to go to the staff review of the draft ordinance.
Am I reading the wrong?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I might be able to help clarify.
Okay.
The expectations that we had from
last meeting were that the board wanted to review the Lawrence Listens surveys and discuss any potential revisions to the draft ordinance based on a final discussion of those summaries. And so we had anticipated doing that first, and then the staff question and Q&A memo is our response to several questions that were asked at the April meeting. And then we have our general review of the draft ordinance from city staff. And so I guess the way that I was thinking about approaching this was the board could have a discussion about the Lawrence Listens summaries first, and then I'm happy to make a few comments, or the board can discuss the city staff's memos. We did not prepare a presentation on the city staff memos. We think they're, it's sort of straightforward what the advice is in those. So.
Tonia, you're muted.
Thank you. I couldn't get to mute. I was minimizing there. So with that explanation, how would the board like to go forward? Board Member Sanjay?
So, Board Member Sanjay. So the way I see it is the comments from the city staff and the legal staff help bring together the ordinance, and we simultaneously look at what the feedback on Lawrence Listens has been. Rather than look at them stepwise, if we can bring them together, that'll be more comprehensive. But I'm willing to go step by step.
Okay. This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Mishra. Calling on Board Member Littleton.
This is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. Sanjay, you put that very well. I think that if we walk through the analysis on both those documents from city staff, it will completely bring us back around to where we were with the survey, because it does point to some particulars in there that we needed their feedback on. And I was just going to reiterate kind of with what Brandon was saying for next steps, because I listened in on all of it from last month's meeting. I have it down at getting city legal's analysis, coming with a thought for the, make any changes to the ordinance for the engagement survey, and how do we collaborate with stakeholders. So with that being said, I think I would agree with Sanjay. We move forward with going through the memos from the staff first.
This is Chair Salvini. I'm in agreement with that too. How about the board? Nods, affirmatives, comments. Jenny, is that a nod? Yes. Okay. Mishra, Stephanie, Jane. Jane, we good on that? Yeah. Okay. I see a nod. Marie, Bill?
Whatever.
Okay. All right. So in lieu of the Lawrence Listens summaries, and we are going to move down to staff review to the memos.
And this is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I did want to
maybe just open with a couple comments. As I mentioned, we have not planned a presentation. We don't have PowerPoint slides or anything. We think the question and answer memo, that's intended to be a pretty straightforward, useful memo, and hopefully you've all had a chance to read through that. Those were questions that I recorded, and I received some notes from several of the board members of questions that they also heard in the April discussion. And so that does date back a few months, so everybody will have to refresh their memories of that meeting. But these were 6 questions that we committed to work on with legal staff, and they've provided some good analysis and research, and I think thoughtful, easy to follow responses. I would say about legal analysis this evening, as the board continues working through the ordinance, as additional questions come up, we would ask not to put our legal staff on the spot and ask for additional legal analysis. The memo that they did provide is well researched, and they did spend quite a bit of time working on that. And so if additional questions come out of tonight's discussion that require additional legal advice, we would ask for some time to do the same and allow our legal staff the ability to do some research and maybe come back at a later date. The second sort of point that I wanted to emphasize is kind of a dovetail, and that goes into the staff review memo. And so this is the more generalized review of your draft ordinance. And so I think we tried to communicate, largely throughout this process. The board has checked in with legal staff, and earlier on in the process last year, we advised that you rely on legal staff to do the drafting, and at a few different points to check on the legality of different components of the ordinance. And so we appreciate you working with us in that regard, and I think that has resulted in an ordinance that really we don't find any conflict of existing law with, and so we don't really have much of a concern related to legality of any component of the ordinance. We did note some considerations for the form of government, and I think this has come up a time or two over the last year. Just an acknowledgement that we are a commission manager form of government, and so under that that legal framework in state statute and in city code, that means that all personnel matters they fall under the purview of the professional city manager, who is a citizen and appointed by the city commission, the elected governing body. And so, and I know that concept, I think you have a good level of understanding about that concept of the form of government. But it is really important, and that does come into play. We did recently have a task force that the city commission appointed, and they did some really good research on changes to the governing body. And both the city commission and that task force, which was facilitated by Dr. John Nalbandian, who's a legendary city management and local government professor and scholar in his own right at KU. They were careful to note that there's no desire to change the form of government, that we need to hold that sacred. And KU is the home. It's known nationally as the home of the city manager form of government. And so when we talk about police investigations or investigations about complaints regarding police officers, it's important to keep in mind our form of government, because those are personnel matters. And that does not mean that we don't take very seriously the need for citizen oversight, for transparency, and for honoring the democratic process and democratic governance. But it does mean that we are committed to maintaining a form of government in which personnel matters fall under the professional staff. And so that means under the city manager. And so in our organization, like I said, the five democratically elected city commissioners appoint the city manager. The city manager then is responsible for hiring and firing decisions of all city employees. There is one, maybe two city employees who work under contract, but for the most part, it's professional staff. And so as an assistant city manager, I report directly to the city manager. I have a number of direct reports under me in the organizational chart. Those include our director of transit and parking, our parks and rec director, our fire and medical department chief, and our police chief. And so the police chief reports to me. And so that is 2 layers of professional management in a civilian capacity, a non-certified law enforcement officer capacity, as well as the 5 elected officials. And so there are several layers of citizen oversight in place presently, and we do take that very seriously, our obligation for accountability, as do our police leadership and police officers. And so that's to acknowledge that law enforcement works in the business of accountability. They take that very seriously. The professional management of the city organization takes that responsibility with the utmost seriousness, and we recognize that this board takes that very seriously. And so I think we definitely have a shared interest in accountability, transparency, and respect for our form of government and our democratic process. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's something that we all share. And as we were thinking about this ordinance, I think about these sorts of processes as having an opportunity to really benefit from an interest-based approach to drafting, whether it's drafting or policy formation. And that's definitely an interest that I think every party who has a direct stake in this, or even an indirect stake as a community member, we all have an interest, that shared interest of accountability and transparency. And so how we get that done, how we accomplish that, really becomes the issue. And I think that's what the board has done a tremendous amount of research on over the last year, and a lot of work on forming a process. And so I would say, as you think about next steps, and as you contemplate the recommendations in the comprehensive police report related to this board and this ordinance, I would encourage you to maybe spend some time in discussion or in thought about our strategic plan. In our strategic plan, we identify 5 different outcomes, and those are areas where we're going to make our investments. That's where we're going to develop projects and programs and improve the existing projects and programs in order to meet various outcomes. One being safe and secure, and I mentioned that one because I think this topic falls squarely under our safe and secure outcome. We want in daily life, we want our community members to feel safe and secure, and especially in their interactions with our law enforcement officers. We want our community members to feel safe and secure, just as we want our law enforcement officers to feel safe and secure. And so I do think that as an outcomes statement, this project and this effort of the board does fall under the safe and secure outcome, which means that the work you're doing can be done to help us advance our commitments to the strategic plan, our goals in the strategic plan. The second thing I'll say about the strategic plan is that we identify a number of commitments. And I tried to highlight a few of those commitments that I think are directly relevant in the memo. And those are specifically community engagement, efficient and effective processes, equity and inclusion, and engaged and empowered teams. And so as you'll read through the strategic plan, and I linked to it in the memo, so hopefully you've had a chance to spend a little time reviewing the commitment statements. That is our commitment for how we get the work done, how we make progress on our outcomes. And so I just really wanted to take a few minutes to emphasize that how we get our work done really is just as important as getting the work done itself and the outcome that results from the work that we do. And you have received advice, recommendations from the Citygate consultants for how to approach this work. And I just want to reiterate that city staff is prepared to assist in any way the engagement process and help convene the stakeholders and community leaders that you would like to work with on either a finalization of this ordinance or evaluating other options. And we are in this together. We are on the same team. The police is on the same team as this board. You share a lot of interests, and I think that is very important to note. I have heard statements from board members and statements from our police leadership and frontline police officers, even our police officers union, about the work of this board. And I'm in the privileged position of having kind of an arm and a leg in every conversation, all sides of the round table. And I do feel like there is a lot of interest and a lot of potential to create something that is going to be held up as a model ordinance, a model process that has the buy-in of our community, of our direct stakeholders, and of this board and the city commission. And so I think in order to do that, we take very seriously the recommendation to move forward in a engaged, collaborative way with some of those stakeholders at the table in a facilitated process. So I did want to just reiterate that we stand ready to make that work for you and work with you in that. The last thing I'll say is I do want to make clear, and Jane, I hope this kind of clarifies for you. The board serves in a leadership role. It's an advisory capacity, but it's also, especially for the purposes of this project, serves in a leadership role. So it's okay for the board to convene an engaged process. It's okay to invite stakeholders to the table. And I think stakeholders look to the board members to be invited, because the board is in that recommending capacity. The board's in that advising capacity. And ultimately, it will be the board who recommends the final work product, the final ordinance for the city commission's review. And so I want to encourage you, don't short sell the importance of your invitation. And I think that if you do invite the stakeholders, they're definitely going to show up, and it can very well be, in a well-designed, facilitated process, it can be a very productive, interest-based discussion. And so that's really all that I wanted to say this evening. And I hope that you find these memos and those comments to be helpful. In no way are we trying to push back against the board's progress. We respect the position that you're in. We respect whatever outcome comes out of your work, and we will accommodate that in whatever way we can. I just wanted to offer that perspective and really encourage you to think about that as you talk about your next steps this evening.
Brandon, thank you for that. That prelude to our conversation that we're going to have over those two documents, and also to the process. Board Member Littleton.
Yeah, this is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. First, I want to say, Brandon, very well said. Thank you very much for that. As I was thinking, coming into this meeting tonight, and I listened in, on the recording from the last one, and kind of where we are in this point in time, with all the invitation that's out there that Brandon has put out and the city has put out. Here's my thoughts for this meeting. Kind of the goal of basically to discuss the documents, the agenda that we have, allow ourselves the time to walk through the analysis, which we were waiting for. We really wanted to hear what the analysis was and the big picture of where we are with a revision and such at this point. But ultimately, I think it's really going to be important for us as we come out of this meeting this evening is that we get on board with the next actions and really move forward with the offerings for the collaboration process. This is our opportunity. We've been wanting to basically sit down at the table with representatives from different areas. And it's critical, I think, at this point that we move to that, put that in action. So we're in line with those next steps for what the City Commission is looking for is a plan and we get to kind of drive that plan, and we get to go and meet with folks that we've been needing to meet with, because we put a lot of work, as we all know, into this revision with where we are today. Some of them, some of the things may move forward like it is, and some others may not, but that's why we need to have this collaboration so we can have all important parties at the table, some community folks, LPOA, city legal, PD, all of us sit down and walk through that process together. But I just wanted to kind of piggyback with what Brandon said so well, that I do think that, we've been waiting. We've waited for Citygate. We've got that now. We jumped on board and went ahead and did our engagement survey. Got great feedback from the citizens. Lots of information. So we've got so much going forward, but now it's time really that we think of, by the time we're done with this meeting, that we take a vote and that we move on to get stakeholders together and we get a plan in place. And that way we all start talking together. That's my 2 cents on piggyback from Brandon.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Littleton. Calling on Board Member Mishra.
So, following up on what both Brandon and Stephanie has said, I also believe this has been a very collaborative process all along, and it feeds very well to the thing that a good plan is an implementable plan is a good plan. We may have a great plan in writing, but if it's not going to go anywhere, all our time is wasted. So we need to figure out a means or a process that can make this implementable. And that's not saying that we take the low road. We still can take the high road and make sure that this is a perfect community for safety and security, where community engagement and equity and inclusion is also considered. So clearly, we are working through the process, and I think both the feedback from the city staff and the legal are very, very much to the point. I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
This is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Board Member Mishra. I'd like to call on Board Member Graybill.
Chairman Salvini, I've got some questions of Mr. McGuire, if that's permissible.
This is Chair Salvini. Board Member Graybill, is this, just for clarification, is this based on the remarks he made, or are we ready to go into the documents?
Both.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Is that permissible?
Absolutely.
All right. Mr. McGuire, on your comments side of things, my first question is, you emphasized that the city administrator or the city manager is solely responsible for personnel matters. And it seems to me like this board, the action or what this board does could be considered a personnel matter. Are you telling us that there is an objection within the city manager structure to this board operating in the way this ordinance proposes that it operate?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I would say I think the guidance that we provided in the memos is pretty straightforward. So I don't want to get into too much technical analysis, just to reiterate that. But I will say, because that's a good question, although framed as do we object? Is there an objection? This is not provided as an objection. This is not provided as conflict. This is to identify that investigations into city employees are personnel matters. That is under the purview by ordinance and statute of the city manager. And so that's a potential conflict, I think, that has yet to really be worked on with some of the key stakeholders at the table. How do we ensure that employee privacy issues or due process issues don't, that there's not some point of conflict with this board's process. And so that's really all I'm saying, is that there's more discussion to be had. And I think that there are a number of different options to move forward positively on that particular subject.
May I follow up, Madam Chairman?
Absolutely. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, that brings me to your report itself. You do bring up potential violations of due process rights of the police department and potential violations of privacy rights of police officers, no mention of citizens. But is there something specific in this proposed ordinance that the staff views as has potential for violating either the privacy rights or the due process rights of a police officer as it stands?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat?
Well, let me rephrase it then. You point out in your memorandum that that there's at least looks to be like a concern that somehow the process involved in this ordinance would have the potential to violate the due process rights of a police officer or the privacy rights of a police officer. Is that correct? Is that what you were intending to convey?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, if I understand the question right, you're saying that we've made a statement that the process that you've spelled out in your ordinance violates due process, or has the potential to violate due process of a city employee. I would say what that's a great example of a conversation that needs to happen, or that would benefit from having the stakeholders at the table. So that's offered as a consideration of a potential improvement. Should the board engage those stakeholders? Tony, I see you've turned your camera on.
May I follow up? May I follow up?
Absolutely.
That is not what my question was. My question was, were you trying to convey a concern by the staff that there was a potential in provisions of this proposed ordinance that would violate the due process rights or the privacy rights of a police officer? I'm not saying, do you think they will? I'm saying, do you have concerns for that?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I think that there are concerns about potential due process and privacy issues that could emerge, that could be unforeseen through the process in the ordinance.
Excuse me, this is Chair Salvini. I just want to confirm this. Board Member Graybill, are you reading from the section subtitled Employer-Employee Relationship?
I am.
Okay, I'm just wanting to clarify that.
Correct. May I follow up?
Yes.
Could you point out the sections in the proposed ordinance that gives you concern that those sections have the potential of violating the due process rights or the privacy rights of a police officer?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. That would be a great question for a group of the appropriate stakeholders to engage in, and that is the purpose of providing that as a consideration. I also see that Marie and Tony are in line for some questions or response, and so I might offer the floor to Marie or Tony if they would like to jump in the conversation as well.
I'd like to follow up with you, Mr. McGuire.
Okay, absolutely. Let's go ahead and we'll come back. Board Member Graybill, Board Member Taylor.
Mr. McGuire, the question is to you. You wrote the memo. Do you personally have concerns?
May I, Marie Taylor?
I've got the floor and I'm not yielding it.
It's an add-on to your comment.
I don't care.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, we do take seriously the privacy of our employees, all city employees, and so any process where we are sharing privileged employee information with somebody who is not part of the city management team is something that needs to be thought through very carefully.
Do you have a problem or concern with specific parts of this proposed ordinance, you personally?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, so the parts of the ordinance that would require the sharing of employee personnel information, which we would otherwise keep private, is a cause for concern. That would be a great example of an issue to work through in an engaged way with the people whose privacy could potentially be subject to this ordinance.
Even if the sharing of that information was subject to be shared in executive sessions under criminal penalty, if any of the people in those executive sessions divulge that information, do you still have a concern?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, I think that that's a great question for you to ask the employees whose information would be shared.
McGuire, I'm asking you as part of the city staff who proposed this in your memo.
I'm not going to answer any more questions from you. Can we move on to the next question, Bill?
No, I would like to have an answer to that question. I think it's a reasonable question.
And I think I've delivered a reasonable answer, sir.
This is Chair Salvini. At this time, can we move to the other comments from the board members? And I'd like to call on Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I think we need to make a distinction between the concern for due process and privacy rights for the employees, but whether those concerns existed under the current framework we have for the ordinance right now. Because that concern probably exists even with us having just the right to hear appeals of the same sorts of some category of complaints. So it may not be that it's something that's in the ordinance as proposed to be revised, but that concern may already exist in the current framework that we have.
In the standing ordinance.
In the current, yes, under the role that the board already plays, if we ever heard a complaint under appeal.
Okay. Right. Okay. I'd like to call on Board Member Mishra.
This is Board Member Sanjay Mishra. I go back to the comment Bill had made, and I think it's, I'm toying with the word to use because we are sworn to confidentiality. And if somebody then comes up and says, this is confidential information, I'm not going to release it because you'll spill it, I don't think it's a fair statement.
Okay. Any other, Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. I think Bill has well articulated one of my own questions. I have written right there in front of me. Thank you, Bill. I don't know that it's a question for Brendan to answer, but it does seem one that the attorneys ought to be able to answer for us. If there's something, we had asked specifically for any problems, any issues that might arise as a result of this ordinance. And this seems to be something that's being targeted in Brandon's memo, but without any specificity to help us work on it. If there is something there that gives rise to this concern for violation of police officers' due process and privacy, then we need to know what that is. And I think that maybe it's Tony Wheeler maybe, or Randy Larkin, who could help us understand where this concern lies within the specific ordinance. What is it in the ordinance that gives rise to this worry?
I'm sorry, excuse me. This is Chair Salvini, real quickly. If I could, Jane, can we clarify and make sure that that's the draft ordinance instead of the standing ordinance?
Yeah, it's the draft ordinance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
That's what we asked the staff to comment on. We asked them to look at our proposal to find out where its weaknesses, where contradictions were, where there were gaps, where there were issues that might arise that we hadn't anticipated. We said, we don't know what we don't know, and we want you to look at it in that very broad way, not just legally, but in that very broad way. But this seems to be something that's legal. This seems to be a legal question. So let's ask for the legal expertise.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I'm going to jump in and then I'll ask Tony to respond directly to the question if she would like. I want to reiterate that this memo, the analysis from the staff of your ordinance is provided to highlight that there is further discussion that we would strongly encourage the board to have in an engaged way with the appropriate stakeholders at the table. I would offer a different interpretation, which is not so much a technical one, but I guess a question for the board of, do you want to do this to the employees or do you want to do this with the employees? And as well as the community. To Board Member Graybill's point, we did point out that privacy of witnesses or victims or other community members is also a potential concern that the board's recommendation to the commission could benefit from working through with some stakeholders engaged. And that's the reference to the potential for an opt-in sort of policy under the other considerations heading. And so privacy in general is we think a consideration that the board's work product could benefit from through an engaged process. And that's the point of offering all of these considerations in the memo, is that there's more work to do. Our intent is not to get into a technical question and answer analysis or hold court tonight. We are saying that we are willing to work and support your work on these. If you choose to engage with stakeholders, we'll make that happen for you because there's more conversation to have. So Tony, if you would like to make further comment, please do so.
The Attorney Tony Wheeler, thank you very much. I would just reiterate that is our understanding. We were asked to provide feedback on the ordinance, to give you some thoughts on areas of concern, and that's what we have tried to do in this memo. We are not prepared to go line by line and have a back and forth on this word versus that word, this line versus that line. The firm that we hired to help us with this matter advised the City Commission in their report that, just going back and forth on a draft ordinance is not the most productive way to move forward. Rather, we wish to identify issues and invite additional discussion with community members, employees, impacted parties on this ordinance. So I just reiterate that was our intention in identifying areas of concern, things that should be considered, pondered, and looked at.
This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Littleton.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I want to take a second to say thank you. And this is just not being kind. This is, we've wanted this analysis. We have this. It speaks highly to some of the specific concerns, in particular, even to Bill's point, that I know that I've been aware of, even our current existing ordinance, that had we, once again, to Marie's point as well, had we even seen a complaint, that it would probably be a matter of issue of what we were seeing or what was disclosed to us. So I just want to thank the staff for putting all this together. We've asked for it, we have it. We've seen the City Gates report. There are definitely some opportunities here for all sides to talk about some of the highlights they put in here that are definitely of concern. Doesn't mean that we can't do this or do that with what we've proposed, but we certainly need to work to come together. Once again, I want to reiterate as well that next steps for coming together for collaboration, because I think that's just going to be critical, because we've got all this feedback, we've done all this work. Now we really need to come to the table and talk with everyone that matters in this process. I think it's really important that, we want everybody, the important people's buy-in, because we want to know that at the end of the day, what we end up with, that we have the oversight that the city wants to have, that we all would like to see, that's right for the citizens. But everybody that matters and stakeholders need to be at that table and everybody walk through that together. Or we're just going to continue to spend a lot of time that's precious to what we could be doing. So that's what I want to just finish up with. So thank you, Tony, for your input.
This is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Robinson. I'm sorry, did you have your hand up?
This is Board Member Robinson. I didn't have my hand up, but I do have just a point of clarification. So how do we envision this conversation with stakeholders going? Is this going to be a conversation where we do go line by line through the draft ordinance and get feedback from stakeholders? How do we envision this happening?
Board Member, this is Chair Salvini calling on Board Member Littleton.
This Board Member Littleton. Jenny, good question. I don't have the answers all for that, but I know I've heard several different variations of thoughts about what that would look like, whether it be an open meeting, not an open meeting. There's mixed sides to both about, I think Marie and Captain McKinley both spoke of, having smaller group meetings would be more effective in order to have more open conversation, not to be not transparent, but to be able to get more down to the core versus open. So I don't know what that looks like, but I think that's something certainly we should discuss what we think that looks like, what would be most effective, or what are our options, right? But I do think that we should look at taking the current ordinance, take our revised, and take what the feedback we've got, all this analysis, and we take all of that information and we sit down and start working through that with all the stakeholders.
Board Member Robinson.
Board Member Robinson. Brandon, are you able to advise us on how boards have proceeded with engaging with stakeholders in the past and what's been helpful in that process?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, I think there are lots of different ways you could approach this. I would say there are a few distinct sort of stakeholder groups, voices that you would want at the table, and then you'd probably want to take this number and augment it based on your own discussion and your own knowledge of the community. So some of the voices at the table, would be the Police Officers Association, police leadership, probably city management, which would be myself, most likely. And so from the staff, city staff, that's probably about it. Now we could augment that with more technical expertise, such as legal expertise or human resources. Those types of our supportive services. From the board, I think you would want at least 3, if not all board members at the table. And I think that's, Stephanie alluded to that. That's kind of a question of, do you want to do it as a public meeting or not? I would say that there's probably, merit to each way of doing it. And in the interest of transparency, I think it's always good to err on the side of doing it in public. But the board members definitely need to have a strong voice at the table. I would suggest somebody from the broader criminal justice system, perhaps the district attorney's office, and we could make that invitation as well. And I say that especially because some matters of complaint result from a criminal or from a policing action that has some sort of tie to the criminal justice system. We also have our city municipal court, so perhaps they could provide some expertise from the broader criminal justice system. I think you definitely want to get some community leadership, especially from some of our underrepresented community members, and we can help with that. We've had many people in the community engaged in various engagement processes over the last several years, whether it's the strategic plan, the police study, or other sorts of community-driven processes. And so we can get some community leadership voices at the table that I think will provide very good insight about what the expectations of the community are for oversight and accountability, as well as matters of privacy from the citizen perspective and that sort of thing. So those are probably like the minimum group of stakeholders, and I would say I would say you wouldn't want to get too many more than probably 10, 15 range if we can work that out, just because it can be hard to facilitate a group too much larger than that, although I have seen it done. And so there are different ways of facilitating. It could be facilitated by a member of city staff, a member of the board, somebody that the board appoints to facilitate it, a consultant. There are some excellent facilitators here in our community who I think would be more than willing to jump right in and help us out if we asked. And I think that they would play a good objective role and help us with that interest-based approach, where we all identify what all the concerns are, and then we all work together to own those concerns and come up with a collaborative solution to those. And so that's really how I guess I would envision it if I were designing the process, if that provides enough detail.
This is Chair Salvini. I saw Board Member Graybill's hand up after Ginny Robinson's.
This is Board Member Robinson's. It was Stephanie Littleton's hand was up.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Littleton?
I was just wanting to comment. I think Brandon somewhat spoke to this board member, Stephanie Littleton, but I could envision us having an independent facilitator to mediate. So I think he kind of threw that in there, but I would definitely think that would be something we would want to discuss having as well.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, can you repeat that?
I just could envision us having an independent facilitator to mediate. I think Brandon alluded to that, but I just wanted to clarify. I think that's something we would want to consider.
An objective consultant, as he mentioned.
Yeah, somebody independent, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Board Member Mishra?
Mishra. So, Brendan, are we thinking about a 3-hour full day? How long is this conversation? One-shot conversation, multiple rounds of conversation? What's the best way to approach this?
Assistant City Manager
McGuire. That is a very good question, Sanjay. I would, having just gone through 2 interest-based union negotiations, where I was on the management side of the table, I would recommend probably multiple sessions, 2 hours apiece, maybe. Just because once you identify the concerns, you want to allow for enough time to really work through those concerns, not just make demands of each other, but truly work in a collaborative way, and that does take time.
Thank you,
Board Member Robinson and Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Robinson, is this something that we're envisioning addressing during our regular monthly meetings? I don't imagine it'll be possible for people to be available for large blocks of time during a weekday. Is that kind of what we're envisioning? Kind of asking you, Brandon, as well as the board.
Brandon?
Jane has her hand up, so I'm going to let her have the floor.
I'm sorry, Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. All this discussion about bringing stakeholders together and talking about the ordinance and issues that might arise within the ordinance, it seems to me that even having this conversation assumes that we as a board are through with our part of the ordinance. I don't think we are. In fact, there are agenda items that we are miles from now on this agenda for this evening that were about our finishing up our work, our making sure that we did the very best job that we knew how to do before we bring it to the table with all these other stakeholders for a conversation. So the question for this board is, are we done so that we are ready to put this out there for others? Or do we want to try to finish it up using the community input that we sought through that survey, plus information that I think we were trying to have a conversation about in the 2 memoranda that were attached to the agenda this evening? Are we done, or do we have more work to do on this ordinance? And on this conversation about getting stakeholders together, we need to be done in order to do that. So that's the question. Are we or not?
Board Member Mishra.
Sanjay, Mishra, board member. So Jane, that's a great point. And the question is, when do you know you have a perfect product, or you have come to that point that you can share it with the outside world? Those are 2 different things. And my experience is, sooner we get the stakeholders involved, the final outcome comes quicker and you have a better product. So in my case, I think we have spent a lot of time working. From my viewpoint, we have spent a lot of time working on this, and there are a few issues that we can clean up, but I think we are ready to go into a conversation with the stakeholders to say, here are some issues, or how do we respond? How do we make it better? Rather than wait for us to do the best, and then they come back and say, what you have as best is not going to fly.
Yeah. This is Chair Salvini. I'm going to say that I don't know that I'm going to agree with Jane, and I'm going to also ask a question. And so the question is, are we done or are we not? And so I think it was the intent of the board to collect the information from the surveys, revisit that along with the feedback from the city staff to polish up a final draft, if you will. And I think I would feel more comfortable revisiting that. And I'll come up with a question here in a minute. Before we go to the table with stakeholders, thinking that that's for final observation and clarification. And, because I mean, at this point, I'm thinking with the representation of the board, with the feedback that we've received in general, and then folding in also some of Citygate's report, I think we're ready to finish it. If there's anything out there that we really need to consider, and this might be an exercise that we need to think about in terms of getting to a final copy to visit with stakeholders about. Do we have one more step of work to do to literally comb through and raise the kind of questions that have already been raised tonight as well about clarification, in that we want a document that we feel comfortable with. And if there are questions about the document that have been raised, we want to make it right. And I think that's the sentiment I've heard tonight as well. I'll move on to Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor. So I think, Tonia, I agree with what you're saying. And I read our work now is to do what Jane has talked about, is to polish up what we see as issues based on the information that was provided and any other thoughts that we have from the summaries of the surveys that we received. And if that's okay, I'd like to just launch off into some of my thoughts on that. So in terms of the legal review of the ordinance, nothing struck me as new. The points that were raised have come up in discussion, and so it's just a matter of whether we still want to proceed with some of the things we knew were challenges. So, for instance, the language that we included that basically created some unfunded mandates and some directives to the city manager in terms of hiring an investigator. We could decide whether that was something we still wanted to keep in the ordinance or not, knowing that is has some legal challenges potentially to that. So that's something we could talk about. I think the issue on privacy and due process already existed as concerns within the current framework that we have and that we technically operate as a board. So I don't think that's not a new issue. It might not be something that would be supported by other stakeholders, but that's what we have now. So the question then in my mind is, do we backstep from that and change what is already an issue that has to be kind of monitored and protected in terms of what we know are what the barriers would be in our role in reviewing any employee file. So that, to me, I don't know what involvement stakeholders had when the creation of the board was done through the ordinance. So that might be a missing conversation, or the same conversation would happen again about that, kind of figuring out like what our role would be in an employer situation. And then from my thoughts from the summary is I think we should have a discussion about whether we have a criminal background check as part of the membership qualifications section, and think through some of the pros and cons of that. And I think we heard from all sides on that issue. So that might be worth having a conversation about, did we change our position in that aspect of the ordinance?
Thank you, Board Member Taylor. I'm calling on Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. Thank you, Marie. You articulated, I think, some of the real key issues that we need to discuss. I would add to that the question of whether or not we want to accept anonymous complaints as a subject for us to consider. I think the opt-in language in that memo is something we want to talk about also.
Yep.
And then there's the important issue that was raised by Suzanne Valdez that would potentially put us in conflict with any criminal investigations of complaints. And that needs to be resolved as well. And for me, that's a nice list of things for us to talk about and try to clean up in this ordinance.
While we're on a roll right here, I want to ask the group's input on anything else that they saw from the feedback and from the analysis that are major issues that we need to discuss for a bit in terms of addressing those issues in the draft proposal. I'd like to call on Board Member Mishra and then Board Member Littleton.
Sanjay Mishra, Board Member. So one of the things I saw was common across the two reports that we got was the workload, and suggesting that if you want to do all, there'll be a lot of work. And that's something we should discuss, is where do we want to be? Do we just look at the appeals, or should we look at all the complaints? Because at this point, we don't know how many complaints come.
Thank you, Board Member Mishra. Calling on Stephanie Littleton.
This Board Member, Stephanie Littleton. Well, Sanjay, you took my point that I was but I want to add to that because I had highlighted all, since we've kind of come a circle about the all. And so I just had a couple of thoughts on that. I do know that the police department, and I'm assuming that they have the new system in place that has triggers that are incorporated into it. And our concerns originally were if we didn't see all complaints, we couldn't see patterns. I think with the new systems in place, some of that takes away some of those concerns for us. And we all know, realistically, that we would not have the time as a volunteer board to see all complaints. I think that's truly realistic. What we obviously are going to probably want to see is the OPA complaints, the more serious matters that do go beyond just a basic complaint that the supervisor can handle on a shift per se. So I thought back through this because I was one that was very much a proponent of the all, and I feel like I've come full circle on that. And I understand in the bigger picture, we don't know the volume, but it's not really probably realistic, but we wouldn't really be spending all of our time looking at all of them. That's not really the point. And we really need to be engaged in the ones that matter. So I do think beyond, I do still feel very strongly that we see more than bias-based complaints. But definitely we don't need to see the all. So I just want to come back on that because I'm right there with you, Sanjay, that's something that we could certainly move on. And I'm just thinking, in the big picture here, I do think, I'm just going to reiterate this again, whatever that looks like, if it's in the next month, I do think that we probably want to get on board of getting this collaboration going sooner than later. I'm not meaning to not finish up the product, so to speak, but I do think as long as we work through, maybe looking through this analysis tonight, and we come to a decision if it's not all complaints and if it's not having an independent investigator in our ordinance, if it's taking out the criminal background piece, that we kind of clean some of that up. Doesn't mean we have to have it perfected by the time we start the collaboration process. But because we can still have that discussion going, coming together, even while we start that going, this is what we want to talk through further. But I do think that we need to move on that. And we don't want to be kind of left behind, so to speak, in getting somewhere with the strategic plan and all that, and the plan from the City Gate report saying, and everybody in the city working on this in their own departments, and then the board's still kind of sitting here. And we have worked on a long time, and we could continue to refine this for the next couple of years, probably. But I think polishing up the important pieces, right? Some of what Jane and Marie have brought up, and just hit on those high points and see where we land to move forward. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Board Member Littleton. I'd like to call on Board Member Robinson.
It's Board Member Robinson. I didn't know if we wanted to go kind of piece by piece with the all complaints, anonymous complaints, criminal background checks, or how we want to proceed with that. If anyone has any other areas that they'd like to discuss.
Board Member Littleton.
This Board Member, Stephanie Littleton. Jenny, maybe let's pick, the first one is at the staff review of the draft ordinance. Maybe go through, hit those high points and see, get feedback from everybody, what their thoughts are on it. I think starting with the first one on that memo, about hiring outside counsel. Let's start talking about these and let's walk through them. What's the thoughts on that as far as what we have in the ordinance versus the explanation that is given? Jane?
Board Member Jane Gibson. We've been at this for 2 hours and have not addressed these last agenda items effectively. And we're talking about the need to have conversations about some number of issues that have been raised by people in the survey and others in the memoranda. My feeling is that we should schedule another meeting, devoted to doing this last polishing up, rather than starting after 9 o'clock to discuss some really important issues about the ordinance. And, I'm old and probably in the minority here, but, we're heading towards my bedtime. And I don't want to start a big, important discussion when I'm ready to fall asleep. So that's just me.
Thank you, Jane. Board Member Littleton?
Yeah, no, this Board Member, Stephanie Littleton, I totally understand, Jane. I'm tired too. I've been working all day. I would not be opposed, maybe schedule a special meeting for the next week or two to come back because it's fresh in our minds. We have some hot particular topics that we know we want to polish up on. So I would be up for that.
Any other comments from any other members? This is Chair Salvini. So Board Member Gibson, are we talking about a special meeting between now and our next scheduled meeting?
I don't think it's up to me. I would do that. I would show up. I think we need to hear from the other board members what they would like to do. Maybe they want to go from now till midnight. The City Commission does that.
Feedback from the board. Board Member Graybill.
Board Member Graybill. No, I don't want to go till midnight.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, how about if we do this? How about if we really hold ourselves accountable to a meeting between now and the next scheduled meeting to really dissect the data that we have collected in the agenda and comb back through on our own the ordinance in terms of where some, particularly in the midsection, which I think most of these affect, of the ordinance, what we need to consider given this feedback, with some of the primary points, by the way, and thank you all, that have been raised this evening with regard to privacy issues, reviewing all complaints. I think since we started the conversation on complaints, the information that we've received with regard to the database system that the law enforcement is going to be setting up, that's maybe address some of those issues. Anyway, that we come back and polish off the ordinance. Okay. Board Member Graybill.
Board Member Graybill, so moved.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. Do we need a second? Board Member Littleton.
This Board Member Stephanie Littleton, I'm not really clear on, are we moving on to having another meeting between now and the next one, or?
Yes.
We're looking at setting, okay, so looking at get kind of a date in mind. I don't know if we have, if Brandon maybe can help us with availability.
Stephanie, we need a second.
Madam Chairman, there's a motion on the floor.
Yes.
If it gets a second, we can discuss it. If
yes,
not,
absolutely. Second, that's
looking. I'm sorry, Stephanie.
So sorry, I didn't mean to ramble on. Just said there's a second motion, so we're good.
Is there a second to the motion? I haven't seen one
Stephanie,
yet.
so Stephanie seconded.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. There's a motion to meet between now and the next scheduled meeting. It's been seconded by Board Member Littleton. Discussion. In terms of the date, we'll send out a couple of proposed dates between then, the next meeting, to see if folks can meet. It seems like Thursdays have been good, so maybe 2 weeks from today. I think we're ready to vote if there's no more discussion. All those in favor, yay. All those opposed, nay. We'll start with Board Member Gibson.
Yes.
Board Member Graybill?
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Board Member Littleton?
Yes.
Board Member Mishra?
Board Member Mishra, yes.
Board Member Robinson?
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Taylor, we have a public comment.
Oh, acknowledge. We'll get it after the vote.
Yay.
And Chair Salvini, yay. 7 votes have it. It's passed. We will meet between now and then to really spend a very efficient time on addressing the ordinance. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and address our citizen member, Alex Kerr.
Good evening again. I want to share some information about what I have been talking with the community about this ordinance. It's not the actual ordinance in written form, it's actually how this ordinance is being created. So half of the people that I'm talking with are thinking that this board should maybe speed it up a little bit, and then others are saying to me that this board should keep it the same speed. And since I'm a community member, I have to represent both of them. So I would like to remind that board, or this board, that some people in the community kind of want, to speed it up. Some people just wanted to say it the same speed. It's just really, I think the sport's fine personally, but some people think this board should kind of speed up how they're doing this ordinance a little bit. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Okay. We've got the motion. Are there any other items that anyone wishes to discuss on the agenda? Board Member Littleton?
This board member, Littleton. So just to get clarification and thoughts from the board with where we're going here. So we're going to meet in the next 2 weeks. What's the thought looking ahead so we can kind of get some things in motion for the next steps, the next action, beyond polishing up the high points that we just kind of briefly mentioned?
I'm going to say that again, the challenge is for each member to really very comprehensively look at all of the feedback now, look at where we might look at some modifications perhaps in the ordinance, only to clean it up to where we feel comfortable at the next meeting. After that, I think then at our next scheduled meeting, that we then talk about next steps in terms of collaboration, and get things ready to do a final on the ordinance, and probably in a couple of months. That's what I think, and assuming that in that time, maybe 2 or 3 months, have those stakeholder meetings, preferably 2. Am I completely off base here?
And this board member, Stephanie Littleton, just liked some feedback. Thank you, Tonia, from others. Just kind of looking at what are your thoughts for a kind of a timeline for stakeholder meeting. That's what I'm really looking at.
Sure. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think after the next meeting, we need to talk about specifics in terms of collaboration, and probably conclude with those processes by October, sometime in October, and have a final ordinance that we can present to the City Commission, assuming, Brandon, that's what our next steps are.
This is a board member. What's everyone else's thoughts in that timeline? You know, that's quite a stretch out there for us to get engaged with all that we've waited for to do here. So, Bill, and then
with Chairman Salvini, I think her plan's a good plan.
Okay. All right. And Sanjay?
I thought the October timeline would work, end of September, early October. So I'm thinking if we are good with our edits by our next scheduled meeting, which is the August meeting, then we have about 6-8 weeks to finalize this.
All right. Any other thoughts?
Jane?
Board Member Jane Gibson. I think that timeline works as a goal. I think we better, build in a little flexibility, because we don't really know what we're going to encounter when we have this group of people who have very different views of the CPRB and what we can and should do and what we should not do. So, I think it's fine to set that as a goal. And I like the plan to meet in a couple of weeks and then meet on the scheduled meeting and then have the discussion about, the collaborative process and who we would like to include and that deadline and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good then. All right. Is there any other discussion or motion? Board Member Littleton.
I motion to adjourn.
It's a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Board Member Graybill seconding. Discussion? Okay. All those in favor, yay. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Gibson?
Yay.
Board Member Graybill?
Board Member Graybill, yay.
Board Member Mishra?
Board Member Mishra, yes.
Board Member Littleton?
Yes.
Board Member Robinson?
Board Member Robinson, yay.
Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor, yay.
Board Member Salvini, yay. The yays have it with a vote of 7-0. I would like to take some time to thank everyone once again for the work that they've done so far, particularly the reports that were prepared tonight by Brandon and Lieutenant Ernst, and also the feedback and the memos from both Brandon and the city staff. We really want to thank you for having all that work available to us so we can roll up our sleeves and get to work on it. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Good
Watch
night.
for an invitation. Okay. Bye-bye.